Welcome to Fast Pace, the new growth, leadership and management podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Dean Mackie. We wanted to peel back the layers on what happens in the world of fast-paced real estate agencies, from new leadership models to the management challenges we all face each day. This is about a new era in the estate agency sector. Rapid changes to business models, service lines, remuneration and growth present the greatest opportunities that we've ever seen. Sit back, get inspired, grow your skills, and reimagine what's possible with Fast Pace. Every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Josh Phegan Digital. It can really be lonely in business, and one of the most important things is to make sure whether or not you've got the right people with you on the journey. Dean, this is one of the great conversations of all time about really understanding what does it take to actually have a great business partnership. You know, if you're lonely and you're on your own, there's nothing like getting a business partner. You kind of got this alignment on day one, you're all excited, you get all energetic, and all of a sudden things can dissipate or ultimately they can boom like there's no tomorrow. Dean, what are your thoughts about all the business partnerships that you've seen? What are the things that make it really successful, and where are the go-wrongs that we can easily avoid?
It's interesting. I mean, I've had lots of those conversations too, Josh, and I've had a few business partnerships that have gone better than others, and there's a lot of learnings in there, you know, and I think that anyone who's getting into any sort of business relationship needs to understand that it is a relationship, you know, and that relationship, you've got to work at it, you've got to nurture it, and you've got to get really clear in a different way to a relationship you might have at home. There's certain things, certain areas that you just need to be really, really clear about. I guess it is like a relationship at home too, I guess.
Yeah.
But, you know, you've sort of got to go into it with an attitude of, in my view, you talk about learn it all culture and learn it all mindset. You've got to be flexible and adaptable, and you've got to be solutions focused and a whole range of things to make a business relationship work, because things don't always go according to plan. You know, everyone thinks it's all beer and Skittles and that things are going to go well all the time, but they just don't. You know, there are different challenges that you have in different parts of the business cycle or culturally or whatever. So you've got to be I think one of the most things that I've noticed that are important is just around alignment, you know, making sure you're aligned on all of the key things that are important to you. So, you know, if I was to sort of wrap up, you know, off the top of my head, a whole range of things, you know, it's just a matter of saying, if you're going to have a business relationship, I've found being really clear about what your swim lane is really important. So who plays what role in that relationship or in that business, and making sure that everyone is really clear about that, because some of the areas that can go wrong is when people sort of doubt each other's focus or doubt each other's role, or they're not clear on their role clarity, and people are then sort of, you know, doing stuff across each other, and that can really send mixed messages in a team and really prevent lots of you know, fast moving decisions and other stuff that it just sort of gets in the way of. So
I look at day one meeting Dean Mackie in your early days, right, when you first had the Neutral Bay office, and one of the great partnerships of all time was Piers van Hamburg, which is still a business partner of yours today. And I have a look at that and I say, like, look, you know, you were really clearly on the strategy, CEO, execution type guy, and, you know, Piers was really keen on, you know, making sure that he wrote great income, which actually allowed, you know, the business to actually function. And I thought, you know, that's an unbelievable relationship. So there's a really good example of swim lanes, right?
Exactly. It's a really symbiotic relationship. So then that way, you know, the role that he's playing is very distinct to mine. And as I've had a number of business partners, like in Dye Jones at the moment, we've got sort of, you know, heading up towards 50 partners. And so I've learned a lot over the years on how to make sure that people understand what their swim lane is and how they can have the biggest impact upon the business. So you know, because you're not going to agree on everything, right? There's just stuff you're not going to be agreeing, but you've got to trust each other to make the right decisions in those moments, right? To lead each other and sometimes be led by each other, irrespective of what your swim lane is. Yeah. And respecting that of each other is also quite crucial. So you know, the things I've learned though is you got, you know, making sure that you're aligned on your vision, your goals, your values are really, really important, because, you know, that can bring a lot of people unstuck. And of course, all of your operational objectives. You know,
the interesting part is that often it starts in the partnership agreement, and you only realise the issues in that partnership agreement when there comes to be an exit. So, you know, all simple things I got to have a look at. So what actually happens in the event of death? What happens in the event that literally there's a material fact that comes up? What happens if there's actually something that goes on in terms of, you know, bringing the brand into disrepute? Can we actually lend against the property management asset for people to buy in, or do they have to be able to get their funding from their own house or something like that to be able to buy into the business, which allows the business the capability to lend against itself if it wishes to either pay someone out or potentially go and, you know, get some additional growth. But also too, what are we going to do as we go through the different phases and stages of relationship? Because, you know, Dean, we're all getting older and you know, believe it or not, there's different stages of life, and, you know, you got a family and not. And what actually happens is that ultimately there's going to be different things that happen. If there's a health scare, all the above, we need to make sure that there's enough runway and we're actually really clear about what's going to go on inside of that partnership. And realizing that too, one of the early things that you taught me was the difference that sometimes the business is in growth mode and other times it's in profit mode. So sitting inside of that partnership, you may well have someone who's a bit reluctant to actually spend on innovation and technology and refits because they're actually in a position that they really want to put the ball down and make sure they can get some juicy profit out this year. And Dean, I also saw a really successful partnership where if anyone in the partnership changed their financial asset status or was about to change their financial asset status by more than 10% in any 12 months, then they actually had to notify the other directors that that was going to be the case, because then everyone was just kind of aware about like there's going to be a liquidity event. Dean's all of a sudden selling his house and buying a really big one, and so he's not ultimately going to have the cash that he might need to inject back into the business if there's something that's going on, just so that everyone's aware about where things are at. These are just, I think, some really important basics to get right. And then also too, like a valuation formula. From day one, how is the business actually valued? If there's a distressed sale because one of those events actually occur, what are we actually going to do to make sure that that can actually happen quite quickly? And it's a really important part about getting that right, because if you're not careful, you end up in business with the husband or the wife or the partner who was actually in the business, and that can be an absolute nightmare if they don't get residential real estate, or ultimately they start pulling a few levers a little bit too quickly, given on some of your investment cycles that you're doing with these businesses. Dean, what are your thoughts? So, do you reckon I've been around a couple of partnerships and seen a few things go south?
Mate, listen, to unpack what you just talked about is an hour's discussion, to be honest with you, when you talk about all those individual points you just raised, if we were to sort of dive into each of them.
Yeah.
Because you are right. I mean, even if you go and refer back to the example you used with Piers, and Piers and I are still business partners, but where we started is not where we are today, both in terms of our journey, our timeline, our family, our needs for money, all those other bits and pieces. And they're all, perhaps we might have started out with intention and had some similar goals. And I think that's an important thing when you're starting out. But understanding how to be flexible and deal with those changes is really quite important. And having the mechanics in place to deal with it is also quite important. So little things like having the right insurances in place if something happens to you, so you're not in business with your partner, you can pay them out, and all those little bits and pieces. So you need to make sure, as you're going through any sort of partnership, and you might have really good intentions, but just get some people around you that can advise you to make sure you got all your boxes ticked and all that sort of stuff. And you are right, there are going to be people who, I'm in business with some partners at the moment that need monthly distributions to fund some of their funding that they've got, or they might have some personal stuff change where, perhaps the business actually might need money put in. So knowing where your partners are at and their capacity is quite important. And I think it's also important, you did mention the word director before. There is a difference between a director, a partner, and a shareholder, because those things are quite important. A director typically is going to have fiduciary responsibility for the business.
I thought it was just a listing tool when I'm in the lounge room.
Yeah, sure. But there are legal requirements around that, and also there are obligations. And so being a director doesn't also mean you need to make all the decisions. It depends how you structured your business, right? But being a director does mean you're on the hook. Now, being a partner, it might mean that you have a smaller percentage and you just do what you need to do, and you get enterprise value and a dividend, and you might sit in a board meeting and have your input. But as an investor, you might not. You're really just getting the reporting and your dividend. So understanding where people play in the partnership is important, and understanding what their willingness to participate in the decision making or what they're really trying to achieve, but also checking in on each other's goals. So you can check and adjust where those things are. So at different times, people may be prepared to put money in and go for growth, and those people might be distinct from people who need a dividend. So having different classifications in your partnership structure is also quite important. So I think I guess there's a few points that I'd make around that. Firstly and foremost, sure, you've got your own self-interest at heart here, right? Because that's where you go into these things. But ultimately, I'd urge people to consider whenever they're going into these situations that they're going to have to take a much more mutual approach. They're going to have to be considered to say, what's in the interests of the business? What's the enterprise's interest above my own? Because I might ask you, Josh, to adopt a tool that you personally don't like the look of. It's a really effective tool and it's great for the organisation, but you might choose that because it doesn't do something for you. And if you're my business partner and you choose not to do it, guess what? Other people will choose not to do it. And because of that self-interest that you had or your own personal preference, might undermine the objectives of what the enterprise is trying to achieve by rolling out that tool. That's a perfect example. So I'd say to you, you need to go into this with a headspace of being mutual, letting go of your self-interest, being prepared to learn it all and embrace change and be flexible. But equally, take the approach of, you need to check your ego at the door. Like, this whole, a lot of agents and agencies, there's a lot of ego attached to their own, our own self-importance. And I think that I've taken a view, what I've learned that works in a partnership is you sort of take more of a servanthood leadership approach. And that actually means that you are letting your ego go and you're looking for the best interests of everyone as opposed to just worrying about yourself and trying to enable others around you rather than sort of just go, okay, what's in this for me? So I think partnerships, when it's just what's in it for me, can typically come unstuck.